Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, thanks for the day. We pray that you'll bless our time together today as we discuss some rather heavy subjects. We pray that you'll always help us to be encouraged, that in all we do, we should act to glorify you. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today we're going to talk about, is that me? I'm not sure why I'm picking up all kinds of, something's very sensitive up here today. And so I apologize for those of you who had just spiked on your thing. I have a, hang on, I'm trying to find a news story because I could just, well, okay, let's go. So we're going to talk about shocks, and you'll see what I mean about this. We talk about the convergence of events. Here's a little grid that I use. I talk about it every week: acceleration, convergence, logistics, understanding. Just a little update. Next Friday and Saturday, I will be at the Hope for Our Times conference in San Marcos. I think I'm speaking on Saturday morning. You can go to hopeforourtimes.com. And you can, I don't know if they have any places left for people to come live, but they have places for people to, you can watch the live stream. It's a fairly nominal fee for what you're getting, right? I don't know what's going on here with this. I mean, is my mic loose, or do you know what it is?
Connection to you. Try it now.
Oh, now I look like one of those geeks that used to run around high school with the, remember the guys who had the audio-visual carts that they... So I'm not sure why this is doing this. So we apologize. I will tell you, for those of you who don't do live streaming and that type of thing, this is the hardest thing that we do. It still seems like I'm getting a lot of popping. Is it this thing?
Don't know. It shouldn't be.
No, it's not that. It's...
I'm going to do this differently.
So anyway, those of you who don't do live streaming, the hardest thing I think we do is sound. That's the hardest thing. And when I'm doing live stream at home, I'm telling you, it's very, very difficult because I have to monitor the sound, the video, make sure everything's going, and there's like a 10 or 15 second delay on it. And so I'm hearing this and I'm trying to talk, and it's just not the best thing. So I'm not sure why we're spiking today.
I'm going to keep working on it.
Okay. So anyway, so we talk about, so the conference will be this Friday and Saturday in San Marcos. Tom Hughes, Brianna Holthouse, Don Perkins, Scott Townsend, I think Greg Denham, and I'm going to forget somebody in that, so apologize if I forgot somebody. So if you want to do that, live stream. So we talk about convergence, logistics, understanding, acceleration. This is sort of my little wormhole AI graphic that I come up with for acceleration and convergence. Again, we also look at this verse every week about the fact that as we get closer to the end, people are going to understand. Daniel has a number of passages about this. In Daniel chapter 11, it talked about the people who the wise would understand what was going on. It talks about in Daniel that people will run to and fro and knowledge will increase. And so I think there's a double meaning to that. The surface meaning is, people are going to be traveling all over the place and knowledge will increase. And what we see is we're seeing this explosion of travel in the world right now. I mean, I saw a picture of Trevi Fountain in Rome. Well, the Pantheon in Rome has stood for about 2,000 years. And the Pantheon, they're now charging an initiation or a entrance fee so you can get in because it's so crowded. And then I saw a picture of Trevi Fountain, and it was the whole square. If you've been there, you know it's a very beautiful square and fountain. It was, you could see the water in the middle, and the rest was wall-to-wall people all the way up to the buildings on the street and everything. It was, and this is happening all over. So people are traveling a lot. Again, this is sort of a little thing that I think of in terms of the first four seals. I'm sort of examining this, and I get emails from people that are also looking at it that, you know, I'm not so sure that the first seal, the white horse, is the Antichrist. It's certainly things that lead up to the Antichrist or that the Antichrist will be doing, but I think all the first four seals say that. And you also have to look at the passage in Zechariah, but they're going to open and they're going to accelerate and they're going to all converge at the end near the ultimate impact of that's going to go all the way until the Lord returns. I don't think you're going to find that it's I have no idea. I'm not even touching anything. Am I? It's annoying me. I can imagine how it is for you. So let's look at some things that are going on in the world. So here's a thing out of San Francisco. Physical peril comes for Golden Gate Bridge. Now, Golden Gate Bridge was built back in the 30s. It's a phenomenally beautiful bridge. Been there many times. Across it, even one day we drove across it. It was 95 degrees at Fisherman's Wharf, and you went out to the bridge a couple miles away. And because it was shrouded in fog, it was 50 degrees on the bridge. So they have these things called microclimates, but they're not getting the traffic now because San Francisco is dying. I think it's partly it's under the judgment of God for allowing the nonsense to go on that they allow to go on there. But commercial real estate is collapsing probably in San Francisco more than anywhere else, although I think it's going to be a problem. Certain areas of the country are going to be okay. For example, we got a lot of stuff going on in Columbus, and things, at least in the suburbs, seem to be holding their own. So anyway, again, you're just going to have to live with the noise today. So I'll try to stand still and relax, not be too stiff. But the Golden Gate Bridge is having trouble. They're projecting a revenue shortfall of about $430 million this next fiscal year. That means a lot of people that used to go across that bridge are not going across that bridge. Traffic is down. Of course, the environmentalists love it, but the bridge needs to be maintained. It's going to be a problem. So here's an interesting thing. These are U.S. research aircraft. And I only point this out because the Biden administration kind of came out with something for climate change this week. And one of the things that came up with climate change this week is that they would try to do things that would dim the sun. Now, it's amazing to me how insane people are with the way they do things. We're going to switch mics here on the, okay. Okay. You make me nervous back there. And the Biden administration has actually proposed this in a report that they gave to Congress about ways that they might deal with this problem. And it's a problem. I mean, everywhere I look, we're heading to Southern California this week, and it's going to be 107 degrees in California. Do you want me to take this off?
Just temporarily, just keep going. I'll switch it while you're talking.
Okay. So I always feel like, so that's how Sandy Patty did it. She just had a good mic. Yeah, right. But Europe's having extreme heat. They closed the Acropolis in Athens because it was so, it's so hot. Phoenix, I heard, at least the forecast I saw yesterday morning was Phoenix is supposed to hit 120 today. And that's hot. I looked at Phoenix for the extended forecast, and for the next 45 days, their high temperature will be over 100 degrees, at least the way it's projected right now. Place we're going in California was 107 yesterday, 106 today. And so it does seem that something is going on. These are record warm temperatures everywhere. And of course, the climate change people are running around literally, what's the old saying, their panties are in a bunch. I'm not playing the clip, so don't get too upset. This is John Kerry. And John Kerry, he had a meeting this week at Windsor Castle with King Charles. And King Charles is the guy who went to the World Economic Forum back in 2020 and said that, it was at COP27 last year a year ago in Glasgow. He said that we just need to have this guy, somebody to marshal the forces with trillions at his disposal. So a lot of people think, well, that was King Charles talking about himself. I don't know. I don't know how much money the guy has. I know it's a lot more than I have. But he had climate talks with John Kerry, who's our climate czar this week, and who was arguing with the people at the Congress, like, well, I don't fly a private jet. I fly on the government's private jet, the government's private airline. But he was also talking about the fact that the way to really deal with the climate change issue is to get rid of capitalism. And that really is what lies at the heart of it. Another thing that the Biden administration did was they came out with a U.S. national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. Look at this. In a private letter to U.S. anti-Semitism envoy, Deborah Lipstadt, Israeli President Isaac Herzog last week called the Biden administration's national strategy to combat anti-Semitism a historic moment deserving of recognition and gratitude. But then when people started looking into it, this was about anti-Semitism, about speaking ill against Jewish people. By the way, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's running for president, came out yesterday and said that it appears that Charlie Vector 019er was designed to target certain ethnic groups, but that it did not have a big impact on Chinese and Ashkenazi Jews. And so immediately a lot of people got really upset about that he was doing some kind of anti-Semitic thing. I'm not sure that he was. I think he was just saying that the Charlie Vector thing was designed to target certain ethnic groups. But these two seem to be excluded from it. I mean, he talked about Chinese, so I'm not so sure I would put the label of anti-Semitism on him. But here's what one person pointed out about this national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. One person noted that Charlottesville appears 4 times in President Biden's 2-page cover letter, including in the first sentence. Judaism appears 7 times in the strategy document, and Zionism doesn't appear at all. The acronym in LGBTQI plus appears 7 times, gender 7 times, equity 10 times, and Islamophobia 21 times. And that, we'll talk a little bit more about the Biden administration thing. Now, this is an important article. I'm going to go through a series of articles here. Some of these are referenced in this Federalist article. And the Federalist article is titled, "The UN is Planning to Seize Global Emergency Powers with Biden's Support." Now I was relying on that. That's right. I suppose I'll get blamed for that one too. The Federalist article. So there's a link in the show notes on the YouTube video and on the Rumble video description. But listen to this. In September 2024, less than 2 months before the next U.S. presidential election, The United Nations will host a landmark Summit of the Future, where member nations will adopt a pact for the future. The agreement will solidify numerous policy reforms offered by the UN over the past 2 years as a part of its sweeping Our Common Agenda. So this is a picture, this is a thing of the Common Agenda. You know, they talked about deadly pandemics, uninhabitable planet, destabilizing inequalities, warning signs, the cost of the digital economy if we don't do anything. It's $9.2 trillion, up to 827,000 viruses that could infect humans exist in mammals and birds. So listen, so if you're going to accuse me of alarmism and misery index, just wait around the UN documents and the climate change documents and the World Economic Forum documents for a while. One of the things back in March that this is also part of this common agenda, the renewed social contract, and how everything's going to be done by the public and everything's going to run through the UN and the World Health Organization. This is where they're really trying to seat power. And of course, the World Economic Forum is on board with it. Also in March, the UN came out with this thing called Strengthening the International Response to Complex Global Shocks, an emergency platform. Back to the Federalist article, many of the details of the UN emergency platform were laid out in a March 2023 policy paper titled Strengthening the International Response to Complex Global Shocks. In that paper, UN Secretary General wrote this: I propose that the General Assembly provide the Secretary General and the United Nations system with a standing authority to convene and operationalize automatically an emergency platform in the event of a future complex global shock of sufficient scale, severity, and reach. Now, what does that mean? It's not really defined. And so you know what these people will do with it. They're going to use it to the maximum ability. We just went through this for the last 3 years. Once triggered, the emergency platform would give the UN the ability to actively promote and drive an international response that places the principles of equity and solidarity at the center of its work. The UN would bring together the stakeholders, that's a word they use all the time, the stakeholders, not shareholders. They're not shareholders in corporations, even though John Kerry acknowledged there are shareholders in corporations, that the managers of the corporation, the directors of the corporation, have a fiduciary obligation to do things like make money. Like, I mean, do you really think that John Kerry cares that his wife's company, Heinz, makes money or not? Of course they do. The emergency platform would give the UN the power to ensure that all participating actors make commitments that can contribute meaningfully to the response and that they are held to account for delivery on those commitments. But it gets worse. As difficult as it might be to believe, the story gets even worse from here. Even though the duration of the emergency platform would initially be set for a finite period, at the end of that period, the Secretary General could extend the work of an emergency platform if required, according to their own policy proposal. And it appears that the Biden administration is fully on board. They've given speeches about how they're completely on board with these proposals. So we have a problem. Here's a little bit. This is some of the things that they think might be complex global shocks, major climatic event, future, it sounds like the news headlines from the last week, to be honest with you. Future pandemic risk, event involving biological agents, disruption to global flows or goods or people, unforeseen black swan event, cyberspace global digital connectivity disruption. And listen, you know, I think sometimes we get a little bit like they tell us that there's going to be cybersecurity events, and that means they're planning it. I don't know if maybe they're planning it, okay? But we know they're going to be cybersecurity events, and we would expect the balance sometimes is we expect people that are in charge of things to be planning for these eventualities. So if people do plan for that, you can't say that they're planning the event necessarily. Maybe they're just part of the government that plans to deal with it if it comes about. And maybe there are people, I'm sure they're nefarious people, that are planning these events, and there are people that are trying, there are state actors trying all the time. There's a constant hacking war going on between Iran and the U.S., Russia and the U.S., China and the U.S., and the U.S. has a big thing. But so they take these complex global shocks, and then you see that they tie them to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030, all of these things, and they want to get everything accomplished by 2030. That seems to be the target date that they're pushing for. Now, also recently, the World Economic Forum, our friends over there at the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution section of the World Economic Forum, put out a report just last month about top 10 emerging technologies of 2023. And so when you see them do this, remember they have that spoken wheel thing that they talk about, and you can dig into the strategic intelligence section of the World Economic Forum thing. It's pretty amazing. So what they did was they sort of went through and evaluated how well are we going to be able to do these future technologies and what's their impact going to be on the environment and type of thing. So here they are. One of them is flexible batteries, powering wearable technologies for healthcare and e-textiles. How do you think that's going to go? What are they going to do with that? Wearable batteries. I mean, like, if you see these Tesla batteries and stuff catch on fire every now and then, how would you like to have one of those strapped on your back and a shirt? That would not turn out very well. Another one is generative artificial intelligence. This is a big deal. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. Now, this is exploding. There are calls all the time, well, we need to slow this down, we need to back off, and nobody's backing off. You need to understand that. They call for slowing it down. Nobody is slowing it down. Even companies that are heavily involved in this have let go the people that were in charge of the ethical part of their development of generative artificial intelligence. It's reached a point where it has a mind of its own. I referenced it in my sermon, first hour, was an article that, an op-ed that Yuval Harari wrote in Haaretz. You can go listen to that, and I talk about that in the context of Stephen's sermon in Acts chapter 7, or Stephen's defense of himself before the Sanhedrin, the council in Acts chapter 7. And Harari, who is an atheist, who I believe grew up as the son of a rabbi. I've heard this. Now, I don't know what kind of, if he's reformed. I highly doubt that he was conservative or Orthodox rabbi. But he talks about, can Judaism survive the coming third destruction? The first destruction, the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians in 586 BC, the destruction of the second temple in 70 AD by the Romans. But then he said the third temple that will be destroyed by the political turmoil that's going on in Israel right now is the Israeli economy, which sort of self-identifies him as an idolater because he's making the economy a temple. And this isn't his own words. Go read it. It's in Haaretz. It's not behind a paywall, and you can read that. But he talks a lot about we need to slow down generative artificial intelligence, and that he even suggested in an interview in Portugal last month that artificial intelligence now could maybe write a Bible, and this time we could get it right. Because the Bible is not, it's just a bunch of myths and that type of thing. But this is the guy who said, when he went to Silicon Valley, to Google headquarters in 2015, he said, I'm glad to be here because it's in Silicon Valley that the religions that will control humanity in the 21st century are being created. So I guess I would call him the high priest, one of the priests of the technocracy that's coming. Or maybe the false prophet. I don't know. Maybe you could say that. But it's coming. It's growing. It's pretty astounding. And the things they're doing are amazing. I've mentioned before, when they were analyzing proteins, they finally came up with a way, after working on it for a couple years, to generate the three-dimensional structure of proteins, which they need to do to be able to chemically alter those proteins. It used to take a PhD scientist 5 years to do one 3D model of one protein. Now they can do it literally. The 200 million biological proteins they had three-dimensional structures of them created literally in a matter of seconds. So 1 billion years of PhD research time, comparatively, and it took a couple months, but comparatively in seconds. It's amazing. This is only going to grow. And so this is expanding the boundaries of human endeavor, but then you talk to people that are involved in it and they're like, maybe it's going to go beyond humans. The third thing that they say is emerging technologies, sustainable aviation fuel. I hope, I'll be flying this week, I hope my idea of sustainable aviation fuel is the fuel that keeps the plane in the air, as long as they want it to be in the air. Of course, it does come down every now and then, but that's not what they're talking about. Then the next thing they talk about is designer phages, engineering viruses to augment human, animal, and plant health. So understand that the three-dimensional thing that they did on the proteins, they're doing on everything biological. DNA, genes, chromosomes, that type of thing. We've talked about CRISPR, haven't talked about it much in a couple of years, but the CRISPR technology to alter genes and DNA, they're going to be doing that like you would not believe. And there's always, it always amazes me when they talk about a human DNA, like 90% of it is junk. And it's like, I don't know that 90% of it is junk. Maybe 90% of it, you don't even understand what it does yet. So how about you have 90% of your DNA removed and we'll see how it goes. You volunteer. I don't see anybody lining up to do that. Metaverse for mental health. So many people, and the editorial page of the New York Times this morning is interesting because what's the whole focus of this opinion section of the New York Times this morning? Loneliness and the impact of loneliness. And social media has fueled that in many respects. You can exist in humanity and never have touch with another human being, but that's not healthy. It has consequences. Shared virtual spaces to improve mental health. I don't think that that's going to work. So this is what our technocratic high priests and priestesses want to happen, is they think that they're going to create a virtual world so we can live better in the real one. I just shudder to think where this is going. Wearable plant sensors, revolutionizing agricultural data collection to feed the world. And I saw a reporter that I follow, I won't say his name, but he said, listen, when I order meat in a restaurant, I will only eat it if it comes with bones attached to it. Because I want to make sure I'm getting real meat, not some lab-grown substitute. But you're going to see a lot of that. Next one, this is number 7, spatial omics. Molecular level mapping of biological processes to unlock life's mysteries. Now, that's an admission that they don't understand a lot of this stuff yet. The amazing thing, the human body is so incredibly complex. But what's happening now is the people in charge, they're denying science. I saw some interviews this week with a lady, I cannot remember her name. It was on War Room on Friday, I think in the morning shows. She was talking about what they're coming out with in terms of educational curricula for students, second, like 2-3-year-old kindergarten, preschool kids on gender, sex, and that type of thing. And it goes all the way down. And I saw some of the pictures of stuff that's coming, and the educational establishment in New York and the left-wing government there has put this in place, and it's going to be rolled out in all the schools in New York this fall. I do not see how you, as a person of conscience or a believer, you can keep your kids in the public schools there and probably a lot of other places. I'm even hearing about it here in our community, which is rural to the city of Columbus. It's going to be very difficult you got to protect your kids. Flexible neural electronics, better engineered circuits to interface with the nervous system. And this is Neuralink and those other things that Elon Musk is growing in. I got a quote from him. Preview is, I don't think Elon Musk is our friend. He does some really cool stuff. He's rich, but he just swore allegiance to the socialist principles of the CCP for his companies, the Chinese Communist Party. Because he's beholden to them. They finance him and they fund him. Here's another one, sustainable computing, designing and implementing net zero energy data centers. And these data centers take a lot of energy. I mean, drive by the ones in New Albany, go buy a cryptocurrency server farm. They take up a lot of electricity. And then AI facilitated healthcare, new technologies to improve the efficiency of healthcare systems. This is an article, this is, I think, Shanghai, an article that came out of Wired magazine a week or so ago, our passwordless future. We're just going to have chips, you know? So here's Elon Musk talking about where he thinks AI is going. He started a new company this year called XAI, or this week. And he was one of the ones who said, hey, we need to slow this down. Now he's creating a company, another company to do it. But here was an interview that he gave this week in which he talked about what he sees as the future of generative artificial intelligence.
I would be surprised if there is not digital superintelligence in roughly the 5 or 6 year time frame.
So 5 or 6 years. So let's hold him to it, see if he's a false or true prophet on that. This is also another World Economic Forum thing that's talking about central bank digital currencies, global interoperability principles. And this is a publication just from in June. Bank for International Settlements. Everybody's talking about central bank digital currencies. How's that going to impact us? Your ability to spend money, that type of thing. We've had warning after warning from people that are involved with it. People that are involved in it at the Bank of International Settlements, Augustos Carstens, has said that they want it to be programmable because they want to know what you're doing with your money. And then there was a professor from, I think, Cornell who spoke at the Chinese meeting of the World Economic Forum. And he said, you know, that's a concern. That's a dark side, that it could be very controlling. They will decide what you're going to spend your money on. But they want to do it. This is an editorial in yesterday's Financial Times. Should the AI doctors see you now? And they're saying, well, listen, you know, doctors really can't do that good of a job, so we should just have an AI intake. Now, I'm a bit skeptical of that because I seem to have my fair share of computer or technology problems or problems with the bank. And what happens when you call up a helpline now? I always check, how many minutes does it take till I can talk to a real person? And then how many minutes before I figure out that the real person doesn't have a clue what they're talking about? I mean, it happens all the time. These helplines, and I think they figure you'll just give up and go away after a few minutes so we won't have to help you. And I'm not sure why they call it service. customer service line. That seems to be kind of they have a different definition of it than I do. This is an article from the Times of London yesterday. Meet the techno-utopians using AI to transform future medicine. Look at what it says in just the little subheadline. Artificial intelligence has the potential to run hospitals and surgeries more efficiently, diagnose disease quicker, and treat it more cheaply than humans alone can manage. In fact, it is already beginning to do just that. And it's happening. I mean, this stuff is out of control. It's a it's a religion, though. This is an interesting article over at Activist Post. Let me just read a little quote or two out of this. Hang on, I gotta. Techno-God, humanity and hypnotic thrall to a techno-industrial God. Now, this person, of course, is writing this as someone who's very concerned about what he's seeing. On the side of an apartment high-rise block dominantly visible between buildings surrounding Brussels' main railway station, the finishing touches are being made to an extraordinary piece of art. One can just perceive the figure in the cage extended out of the hydraulic arm of the vehicle, which provides the platform from which the artist can apply his paints to this vast canvas. The work depicts, as I grasp it, a shining techno-industrial mobile phone tower pinnacling out of the summit of a vast concrete temple flanked by two grand curving stairways. By the way, if somebody's in Brussels and you can go down and get a picture of what they're painting, I would love to have that. Flanked by two grand curving stairways, at the bottom of which is a platform covered with a great crowd of people. Above the tower, wispy chemtrails have formed an X in the sky, while the bottom quarter of the artwork is dominated by a voluminous sea of red dotted with flecks of black. The symbolism is powerful. The work might be titled, quote, "So here we are," unquote. For yes, this is where we are, if by we one understands the current materialistically imprisoned post-industrial world driven on by the relentless forces of globalism. And Brussels is the headquarters of the European Union. He goes on to say this, 20 years ago, I decided to cut my ties with this program. Dispensing with the mobile phone turned out to be an act of liberation, soon to be followed by the ousting of the TV. Big Brother was consigned to the back seat, and I saw that a life that belonged to myself still existed, albeit with the proviso that one prioritized one's values with a solid dose of determination to be true to that which is real in life. Yes, yet this techno-industrial suicide machine is staffed by humans who appear not to recognize that their joint mission is programmed to end in collapse. On the contrary, they seem to think that by increasing the efficiency and speed of the means of travel, it will somehow consummate its own need to arrive at where it is headed. Where or what that is simply never gets asked. However, the psychotic gods of insentient progress who designed the program that have built into it a series of events which can reach a certain conclusion in something they call the transhuman. The transhuman robotic state of computer connected and controlled brain power for those able to pay for it. To pay for the right to be dehumanized and rendered devoid of the need and indeed ability to think, freed from emotion and freed from a soul-based link to one's creator. Stations on the way to this dark point of human annulment are laid out under the WEF creed known as the Great Reset, a reset from human to non-human. Here are some of these stations along the way. It's like Stations of the Cross. The end of farming on land as we know it. The removal of redundant farmers and country dwellers into 5G and 6G controlled total surveillance smart cities. Countryside and farm landscapes redesigned to accommodate the rewilding projects and gated access to designated leisure sites for those who can afford access. The end of banknotes and coinage replaced by a centrally controlled digital currency whose availability will depend upon one's social credit. The confiscation of one's, you think I'm a bummer? I mean, listen to these guys. The confiscation of one's assets and private property with the option to rent aspects of them back from the corporate state that is to become the new owner. When I went to the technology continuing legal education seminar I went to for a couple of days in San Francisco back in 2019, the last trip I'll probably ever make to San Francisco, they were talking about everything's just going to be rented. It's going to be the Internet of Things. It's going to be the Internet of Bodies, all of these things. 100% surveillance via satellite and the Internet of Everything and the profligate use of algorithms to pick up any signs of resistance in communications. The repression of true spirituality in favor of a one-world religion. And he goes on, he's got about 20 or 30 things. Designer gene-altered babies via laboratory cloning of DNA sequences and cells. I mean, these are all things that we've talked about over the past year. So get this article at Activist Post by Julian Rose, July 10, 2023. Humanity and Hypnotic Thrall to a Techno-Industrial God. A great article. And he talks about the speed of travel. And this is in just yesterday's London Times of London. Full speed ahead for hypersonic air travel. There was also an article in the Wall Street this week about the torture that's being inflicted on travelers by the size of airplane seats. And one lady says, I'm 5'9", but my femur doesn't bend. So I'm a good bit taller than that, and I can tell you it's not, I couldn't get out of the seat. I remember I was on a United flight once. I couldn't get my legs behind the seat in front of me. I'm like, the bones don't bend. So they finally moved me up front, but I was thinking about what happens if there's an emergency, it's not safe, and now newspapers like the Wall Street Journal are bringing this up like it's got to the point where it's questionable whether they could evacuate a plane and they needed to. Now, and so this is a Brownstone article, The End of the Freedom to Travel, talking about how they're going to control things. They don't want you to really travel. You don't need to travel. Just get our $5,000 headset and you can go there virtually. And you won't be messing up the environment, you nasty humans. Stay home. Okay, if you have to go out, you can go within 15 minutes of where you live. And so it becomes like a prison. So in the context of the artificial intelligence, there's a lot of, so Elon Musk thinks we're going to get there in 5 or 6 years. People are concerned about it. There are other people, I saw an interview this week, I think with Mark Andreessen, and he's saying like, listen, an artificial intelligence controlled pilot will always make a better decision than the human pilot. I don't know that that's true. I mean, how many accidents do they have with these automated driving Teslas and those type of things? They're not making too many good decisions in those cases. Maybe they can't make those, and maybe their decision has no humanity or soul behind it either. That's also a concern. So Eliezer Yudkowsky, who I played a couple weeks ago, about a month ago, when this artificial intelligence thing was really ramping up, and he just said, we got to get rid of this. It's like we're summoning demons. So he did a TED Talk back in April. Here's just a few minutes of him talking about, now listen, I don't think you would be offended if I identified him as kind of the consummate geek, but he's been involved in this artificial intelligence thing for a couple of decades. And he's been sounding the alarm, hey, this is going to get out of control. This is going to get out of control. And now he's really almost screaming at the top of his lungs. So here's his TED Talk. He did 10 minutes on it. Of course, they don't give you time to talk about important issues much more than 10 minutes at the TED Talk. But here's what he said.
Since 2001, I've been working on what we would now call the problem of aligning artificial general intelligence. how to shape the preferences and behavior of a powerful artificial mind such that it does not kill everyone. I more or less founded the field 2 decades ago when nobody else considered it rewarding enough to work on. I tried to get this very important project started early so we'd be in less of a drastic rush later. I consider myself to have failed. Nobody understands how modern AI systems do what they do. They are giant inscrutable matrices of floating point numbers that we nudge in the direction of better performance until they inexplicably start working. At some point, the companies rushing headlong to scale AI will cough out something that's smarter than humanity. Nobody knows how to calculate when that will happen. My wild guess is that it'll happen after 0 to 2 more breakthroughs the size of transformers. What happens if we build something smarter than us that we understand that poorly? Some people find it obvious that building something smarter than us that we don't understand might go badly. Others come in with a very wide range of hopeful thoughts about how it might possibly go well. Even if I had 20 minutes for this talk and months to prepare it, I would not be able to refute all the ways people find to imagine that things might go well. But I will say that there is no standard scientific consensus for how things will go well. There is no hope that has been widely persuasive and stood up to skeptical examination. There is nothing resembling a real engineering plan for us surviving that I could critique. This is not a good place in which to find ourselves. If I had more time, I'd try to tell you about the predictable reasons why the current paradigm will not work to build a superintelligence that likes you or is friends with you, or that just follows orders. Why, if you press thumbs up when humans think that things went right, or thumbs down when another AI system thinks that they went wrong, you do not get a mind that wants nice things in a way that generalizes well outside the training distribution to where the AI is smarter than the trainers. You can search for Yudkowsky list of lethalities for more. But to worry, you do not need to believe me about exact predictions of exact disasters. You just need to expect that things are not going to work great on the first really serious, really critical try, because an AI system smart enough to be truly dangerous was meaningfully different from AI systems stupider than that. My prediction is that this ends up with us facing down something smarter than us that does not want what we want, that does not want anything we recognize as valuable or meaningful. I cannot predict exactly how a conflict between humanity and a smarter AI would go, for the same reason I can't predict exactly how you would lose a chess game to one of the current top AI chess programs, let's say Stockfish. I do not have any realistic plan, which is why I spent the last 2 decades trying and failing to end up anywhere but here. My best bad take is that we need an international coalition banning large AI training runs, including extreme and extraordinary measures to have that ban be actually and universally effective, like tracking all GPU sales, monitoring all the data centers, being willing to risk a shooting conflict between nations in order to destroy an unmonitored data center in a non-signatory country. I say this not expecting that to actually happen. I say this expecting that we all just die. But it is not my place to just decide on my own that humanity will choose to die to the point of not bothering to warn anyone. I have heard that people outside the tech industry are getting this point faster than people inside it. Maybe humanity wakes up one morning and decides to live. Thank you for coming to my brief TED Talk.
So, I mean, he's a pretty knowledgeable guy. So look, he's going to be the most negative side of this thing. There are plenty of other people on the positive side. Like, well, maybe it's going to really help people live a better life. Maybe it's going to help diagnose or prevent cancers or other diseases. And maybe that's true, but there's a very dark side to it. And everybody that really is involved in this, like Eliezer Yudkowsky, like even Sam Altman and everything, even Sam Altman says, well, I'm optimistic, but yeah, it might kill some people, but cars kill people too. And we've learned to live with that. But the problem is this thing could become so much more intelligent. And maybe it's science fiction that it's going to get out of control. But the problem is there's going to be bad people that are going to have control of it. And so the governments of the world that we don't trust, which are most of them, they're full speed ahead on this. I mean, Our military is doing it. China's military, Russia, all these countries are moving forward with this. And who ultimately is going to say put the brakes on it to protect humanity? And we see things like drone swarm technology. It's here. It's already here. And it's having an impact, like the war in Ukraine has probably gone better up until now for Ukraine than people thought, because they have been given access to artificial intelligence and satellite technology and things that I don't think Russia thought they would get access to. Now, look, I don't think Ukraine's going to win this thing. They have to probably kill 4 times as many Russians in any battle than their own that get killed. And that's just not happening. So I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. But I want to focus right now on northern Israel and some things that are going on there, because a lot of people hate Israel. There's been this, I did a recording with Pablo at Serpents and Doves where we talked about Jenin, the raid in Jenin and what's going on in Jenin and the refugee camp there. You can get that at the Serpents and Doves podcast, YouTube channel and podcast. I think that was put up on Tuesday or Wednesday. But I love this graphic that somebody did to sort of indicate the 3-dimensional structure of Holy Land in Israel, and know that most Israelis live in that green strip there along the ocean. That's where the majority of them live. The Palestinians, which really kind of were created by the KGB and Soviets as a method to kind of tweak the West back in 1964 with the original Palestinian Liberation Organization charter, which you can find online. You can find the amendments and that type of thing. They live in the biblical heartland, the highlands of Samaria to the north and Judea south of Jerusalem, including the Jerusalem area. But what's happened this week was there was a dust-up there's been some things going on over the last few weeks in northern Israel. And so what you need to understand, or what we should all understand, is that when Iran does things and Iran uses its proxies, Iran is sometimes trying to negotiate through their activities. And they don't negotiate like we think they should negotiate. They have a very different style of negotiating. I had an attorney friend, and I'm not trying to make an ethnic thing out of this, but he liked rugs made in certain countries in the Middle East. And he said, you learn a lot about negotiating when you go there and try to negotiate a price for the rug that you're going to buy. Usually you go there and there's been a sign on the business for the last 8 years, going out of business sale. And that's sort of the negotiating thing. And you hope to get out of there and felt like you've only been mildly robbed, is what he said. So, and this is how the Iranians and certain religions negotiate in the geopolitical sphere. So what happened here was that Hezbollah went into northern Israel across the blue line. So you see the white line kind of squiggling from left to the top center. That's the blue line. That's the border between Israel and Lebanon. Now it's changed over time, but back after the 2006 war, they pretty much agreed, okay, we're going to agree this is what the border is going to be. And there's UN, quote, peacekeepers there to supposedly hold that. But what Hezbollah did this week was they went across the blue line, south of that line, and they erected 2 or 3 tents. That happened back in June. And a lot of people in Israel have been really upset, like, why are we letting these tents there? This is Hezbollah making an incursion into our territory. They have Hezbollah operatives, which you can see in the picture in the lower left-hand corner. And they have a series of also areas that are sort of hot zones where they think that if there is going to be an attack, it's going to come in these, what are there, 12, 13 red zones where they're going to come. So if you look at the, on the right-hand side of this picture, oops. Okay, here we go. Up here, and I'm going to make a different color on that. Hang on a second here. No, that's not going to work. If it's laser, it's red. So up here, this area up here around Mount Dove and Mount Hermon, this is northern Israel, and then this area called Sheba Farms. So Sheba Farms was an area that in the 1967 war, when it started, it was owned by Syria. Now Lebanon and Hezbollah claim that that's really part of Lebanon. So if you've ever been to Tel Dan, which is located right there, you see the town there called, I'll say Gajar. I'm sure that's not how you pronounce it right here. Gajar. Okay, that town, 2 miles this direction is Tel Dan. I actually think I have a map with this. Okay, so there's Tel Dan. Oh no, I take it back. So that's Caesarea Philippi, that circle right there. Remember the Temple of Pan? Jesus went there with his disciples. And then you go just a little over a mile to the west, that's Tel Dan Nature Preserve. And that's where Jeroboam erected one of the golden calves. And then there's this town called Gajar up there. And it's a Lebanese village. After the 1967 war, when you go to Tel Dan, they dug foxholes, trenches along the Tel there. They brought in archaeologists, the IDF, and they said, okay, can we dig a trench here? And the archaeologist said, yeah, I don't think you'll damage any archaeological evidence here. So you go there to Tel Dan, right there near where the golden calf altar was, you'll see trenches that still exist today from the 67 war. And after this, and everybody kind of forgot about Gajar. Gajar was a Syrian village on the Lebanese border, and people just forgot about it. It just wasn't that important. And about 2 or 3 weeks after the war ended, the elders of the village that came down the hill to Tel Dan, to the IDF, waving, with white flags, saying, hey, we're starving up here. Everybody forgot about us, and we're kind of in no man's land here. We don't have we're running out of food. We want to be part of Israel. So Israel made it part of them, but back in the time of the Obama administration, the UN and others in their infinite wisdom decided to split the village in two, but just within the last 3 months, 4 months, Israel is now allowing people to go to Gajar to visit it. And so people have been going to visit it. And now, so what happens is Hezbollah decides to build a tents in that area because this is the way they negotiate things. So here's a little report from I-24 News about what's going on. Oops.
"17 years after what Israelis call the Second Lebanon War, tensions are once again spiking on the Blue Line, which separates the two countries and has become a scene and source of friction. Accusations by Lebanese farmers that Israel is entering their territory while working on the border fence alarmed the Lebanese army already in the beginning of the year. In spring, the Iranian-backed Hezbollah erected 2 tents just south of the Blue Line, positioning them in Israeli territory, in an area the Israelis call Har Dov and the Lebanese the Sheba Farms. It's disputed territory claimed by Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. Hezbollah agreed to remove one of the tents, but only after diplomatic negotiations and efforts of the United Nations UNIFIL peacekeeping forces permanently stationed along the demarcation line. But those manning it appear to have simply been moved to the second tent, and Hezbollah says it would only remove it if Israel returns the northern part of the disputed village of Rajar. This village is bisected by the Blue Line, effectively dividing it into a Lebanese north and an Israeli south. It used to be accessible only to the about 2,500 residents, many of whom have both Lebanese and Israeli citizenships. Israel opened it up to the public last year, and a fence separating the northern part from the Lebanese territory was built, also to thwart the numerous smuggling attempts from Lebanon. Now, Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati and Foreign Minister Abdallah Abu Habib have told the commander of UNIFIL that Lebanon demands a full demarcation of its border with Israel in exchange for the removal of the Hezbollah tent. And the language on the political level is clear. The Speaker of the Lebanese Parliament, Nabih Berri, was quoted in Lebanese media.
All Lebanese, regardless of their political, spiritual, and partisan orientations and affiliations, must be aware of Israel's hidden intentions, Berri said. He added that national belonging and defending sovereignty, independence, and identity are not a point of view.
In April, as a response to the events in East Jerusalem during Ramadan, a rocket was fired from Lebanon into Israel, which it blamed on a Palestinian faction. At the beginning of July, an anti-tank missile was launched from southern Lebanon. Israel responded with artillery fire.
Against any violation of our sovereignty and challenge to our presence in our country, we will respond at the place and time of our choosing, in overt and covert ways that will exact a clear price from those responsible.
Whether these latest incidents is just Hezbollah testing the waters in terms of how far it can go without risking a full-scale military escalation, or whether we are already seeing the prelude to one, a new war with Lebanon seems as close as ever, 17 years after the end of the last one.
And then Hezbollah's leader Nasrallah, he said this in a speech this week on the anniversary of the 2006 Second Lebanon War. The Lebanese stance on Gajar must be decisive, and this is Lebanese territory, and the efforts of the Lebanese state and the resistance will be integrated. This land will not be given up to the Israelis. Israel must end its occupation of the border points. Gajar will not be given to Israel, neither will the Sheba Farms and the hills of Kfar Shuba. I think that's Mount Dove. Israel has not dared to carry out a military act against the tent. If Israel was the Israel of the past with the unwinnable military, and Lebanon was the Lebanon of the past that could be conquered with a musical band, they could have easily removed the tents. But because of the power of the resistance today, Israel does not have the courage to carry out such a maneuver. The resistance operatives have orders to act if an Israeli attack occurs on the tent set up on the southern border, and such an incident will not pass with silence. So he said this on July 12, 2023, on Wednesday this week. In the Al Akbar newspaper, this is sort of I'm always interested at the imagery that the editorial cartoons use to sort of describe Israel. Last week in the Jerusalem Post, Seth Frantzman wrote an article saying that Hezbollah is rewriting the rules. This is what they do. This is how they negotiate. They don't have any right to put it there. And you can see they put it there and Israel doesn't do anything. And they say, see, we're so strong, Israel's afraid to even attack that. And they're sort of like, but if they do, then Israel's afraid. Are they going to unleash? Is this when we're going to face the unleashing of the rockets that everybody has? And this is what they did with the maritime border. This was a shameful thing that Amos Hochstein from our State Department did. Remember, Israel was going to build a pipeline to get gas to Europe, which they could use right now since they shut down before the Nord Stream pipeline was destroyed by whoever did it. Germany said, shut it down. We don't want any part of it. I won't go there because everybody gets mad when you talk about it. So, but there was a line that's supposed to go out from the border, and it crosses some of the gas fields that have been found in the Mediterranean. By the way, I just want to make sure. I hear people saying, "Oh, this is the largest gas field in the world." It's not the largest gas field in the world. That's the South Pars field in the Persian Gulf. It's a significant field, but I'm going to get my numbers wrong. I think I have them correct. So Israel has like 41 trillion cubic feet of proven gas reserves. It's probably gone up a little bit because they had another gas field that came online or is ready to come online when they get the equipment there. But Russia has like 1,700 trillion. So 41 trillion versus 1,700 trillion is quite a significant difference. But Russia's having problems. I mean, they're under sanctions. Some of their gas, it's some of the most expensive gas in the world to produce. It costs a lot to get it out of the ground. Some of it's in Siberian permafrost. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, look at their population pyramids. They don't have the educated young engineers and everything to manage those fields. They have to bring in people from outside. But now up in the Siberian areas where it's an engineering, it's difficult to engineer getting gas out of there. They don't have the engineers. They were bringing people in from other countries, but now they can't because of sanctions. So Russia may be in a bit of a decline. And that Russian thing that happened with Ukraine, that was probably going to happen in this generation because Russia's running out of people. Like a lot of countries are running out of people. That's why I mention China all the time. China's in economic decline right now. They're also in demographic decline. They're still hanging in there, but it will come, what's the old saying, gradually then suddenly. And all of a sudden it'll be like, where did half of our population go? And that's going to have a huge impact because their population is aging and they're not producing babies, same way in Russia. So they negotiated over those lines. Amos Hochstein came in and shut them down, and they gave part of it to Lebanon. And everybody said, Yair Lapid, he got on there, he was either foreign minister or prime minister at the time. He said, look at this great deal that we did. It almost reminded me of Chamberlain holding up the truce that he signed, the agreement that he signed with Hitler. I hold in my hands peace for our times. Well, it didn't work, did it? Because they're still making these claims. It's the way they negotiate. Now they're putting these tents up on your land, and what are you going to do about it? And everything's very close. Look, from Beirut to Damascus, that's 50 miles. Okay, when you're in the Golan Heights, you're, 30, 35 miles from the center of Damascus. So everything is very close. So this is the number of articles. This is at the Atlantic Council. Hezbollah and Iran have opened a fourth battlefront inside Israel. And they're talking about Jenin. They're talking about the tents of Hezbollah. The Alma Center, which I highly recommend, that used some of their graphics earlier, israel-alma.org. Hezbollah is now, they're saying, trying to take control of Beirut Airport. Remember we had that speech by Netanyahu a few years ago where he was detailing some of the stuff that's going on around Beirut Airport. And nobody ever refuted it. They're always going. And then in Friday's Jerusalem Post, Seth Fransman, actually in today's Jerusalem Post, Hezbollah's new normal raises tensions on the border. Seth says this, this now appears to be the new normal. Last week it became clear that Hezbollah was trying to change the rules on the border. In addition, a speech by Hezbollah leader Nasrallah revealed how the terror group is throwing down a rhetorical gauntlet over some of the tents it has set up. The tents were an attempt to move a pawn into the Mount Dove to try to trade area for demands regarding Gajar, a village on the border recently opened to tourism. So that's exactly correct. Caroline Glick has a good article at JNS that she released this week. Israel must respond forcibly to Hezbollah aggression. And I think she's correct that if they just let it go, they're only going to keep pushing. And at some point you have to do that. Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser over at the Israeli Defense and Security Forum, that's Amir Avivi's group, talked about, listen, we need to recognize that there's a new regional architecture involved in this area. Even the Washington Institute for Near East Policy said this: yellow tents across the blue line, Hezbollah's new brinkmanship. So a lot of people are looking at this, analyzing, and saying this could be a trigger for war between Israel. Of course, now Cliff May at Foundation for Defense of Democracy, has a thing about Iran's shadow war, talking about Iran is behind this. Iran funds Hezbollah. Of course, our president weighed in with Fareed Zakaria last week on CNN, and this is what he had to say about, hey, why aren't you inviting Bibi Netanyahu to come speak in the United States? Why aren't you inviting him to come meet with you?
What will it take for Bibi Netanyahu to get an invitation to the White House?
Well, first of all, the Israeli president is going to be coming. We have other
Herzog is
contacts. I've been, as I think it's fair to say, an unyielding supporter of Israel for over, I've only been around a couple of years, but for as long as I've been around. Bibi, I think, is trying to work through how we can work through his existing problems in terms of his coalition. He has, I'm one of those who believes that Israel's ultimate security rests in a two-state solution. I think it's a mistake to think that as some members of his cabinet, and this is one of the most extreme members of cabinets that I've seen. I go all the way back to Golda Meir and all, you know, and not that she was extreme, but I go back to that era. I think that the fact that the Palestinian Authority has lost its credibility, not necessarily because of what Israel's done, just because it just lost its credibility, number one. And number two, created a vacuum for extremism among the Palestinians. The PLA, there's some very extreme elements. So it's not all Israel now in the West Bank, all Israel's problem, but they are part of the problem. And particularly those individuals in the cabinet who say they have no right to we can settle anywhere we want, they have no right to be here, etc. And I think we're talking with them regularly, trying to tamp down what's going on, and hopefully Bibi will continue to move toward moderation and changing the court.
So, and by the way, this, you know, you're not allowed to be here. Accusation sounds like some of the things I hear coming out of Washington about people. You're not allowed to be here to do this, or we will prosecute you. There's a lot of parallels going on. So everything this guy says is, yeah, I guess you could say a lie. Lies. By the way, we're funding to the tune of about $1 billion a year the Israeli or the Lebanese army, defense forces, which Hezbollah's in charge of everything. So everybody says, oh, you're giving all this money to Israel. Now, the way that works is usually they're sort of, you're going to buy this amount of material from us. And so it's not like we just give them cash without any restrictions. And by the way, this right here, I used this picture before. This building is costing well above $1 billion. What is it? It's the new U.S. Embassy in Beirut. Now, this is, yeah, look at that thing. Yeah, I think it's the second largest U.S. embassy in the world behind Baghdad. I don't know, I don't understand it. Tom Friedman, who came out with an editorial opinion in, I think, Wednesday in the New York Times, the U.S. reassessment of Netanyahu has begun. Now, Friedman sort of demonstrates in here that he doesn't really understand what's going on. He doesn't understand the Islamic component of the conflict. This is part of the Palestinian National Charter from May 28, 1964, I referenced earlier. And this is an editorial in response to Friedman in the Wall Street Journal on Friday. What does Biden have against Israel? Why does President Biden go out of his way to snub, criticize, and give marching orders to the government of Israel? At least rhetorically, the president and his administration treat Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his governing coalition worse than they do the ruling mullahs in Iran. This is exactly correct. This is how they're treating it. Mr. Biden declined again this week in gratuitous public fashion to invite Mr. Netanyahu to the White House, pointing to the prime minister's elected coalition partners. Tom Needus, Mr. Biden's departing ambassador to Israel, chimes in that the U.S. must speak to stop Israel from going off the rails. Each jibe makes headlines in Israel. When Mr. Netanyahu was most vulnerable in late March, Mr. Biden needlessly decreed that Israel cannot continue down this road on judicial reform. The prime minister had already changed course and tried to moderate it. Now they're pressing on it. And listen, Biden's talking about judicial reform. What a hypocrite. The Supreme Court of the United States came out and said, you cannot do this loan forgiveness program. So what's the Biden administration doing this week? They're tweaking the student loan forgiveness program. They're going to do it anyway. They don't care what the court says. They're scofflaws. Another analyst talked about what's going on about playing out the war scenario, which Nasrallah continuously threatens Israel with, in which Hezbollah from the north and Hamas from the south attack Israel and fire thousands of rockets in a bid to overwhelm Israel's anti-missile Iron Dome and allow rockets to pass. The conclusion of this commentator on Twitter is, listen, Israel would crush them in a heartbeat. But it's not going to come without cost. There's going to be lots and lots of people that are killed, injured. It's going to be very disruptive, but it's coming. So a lot of protests going on in Israel about the judicial reform. Again, this is from the New York Times this morning. A bunch of the reservists in the Israeli Defense and Israeli Air Force are saying, hey, if you don't withdraw judicial reform, we're not going to serve. Now, I think the way to handle that is, okay, you're gone. Get out of here. You can't do that. But this is how the left does things. And they're doing it in our military too, with the way they're instituting policy. And they're saying, if you don't like what we're doing, you get out of here. You people, you conservatives. And they're changing the face of our military. It's pretty concerning. So Netanyahu was in the hospital yesterday. I guess he had some dehydration. And let's see, what's this article? This is an interesting article. This was in Haaretz. Remember I played the clip last week of Naftali Bennett talking to the BBC reporter and said, you're just killing children. Where does the BBC get such ridiculous notions? Well, one might be an editorial like this down here from a month or two ago when they had the latest dust up, with people, and Israeli went into Jenin or another place to take out terrorists. And everybody said, you're killing kids. This is at Haaretz newspaper in Israel saying, killing kids is best, bro. And it's the same thing that the BBC reporter was doing. This comes from somebody within Israel. Here's the article. Just absolutely insane. Now, they've changed the title of it on the online portion. Now, I have access to the replica edition. So the original editorial said, killing kids is the best, bro. Now they've changed it to the dead children of Gaza will always haunt us, because that makes it a little bit more palatable. And then just a couple more things. This is Netanyahu. He's now filed a petition against him that's been taken by one of the Supreme Court justices in Israel to remove him from office because he's violating a conflict of interest agreement. It's crazy. This is the article I referred to earlier of Harari. Can Judaism survive a third destruction? You can listen to what I did first hour about that. So we have the BRICS nations getting together, trying to do a gold-backed security, mainly through the Shanghai Cooperative Organization. That's a map of those areas. Central Asian companies, about 44 countries now. And a lot of people are concerned that if they get the world to adopt this currency, the U.S. dollar is no longer the reserve currency. But I would say that the U.S., I just don't know. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be as easy as everybody thinks it is. And it'll be one of these things that happens gradually then suddenly. I mean, I think it's eventually going to happen. But the U.S., at least reportedly, has the largest gold reserves in the world as well. So I don't know if that, doing it, Xi Jinping came out and told the people, I don't know why I put that. Oh, China's preparing to go to war. That was from the Sunday Telegraph last week. And then, of course, they had the NATO meeting this week, and Zelensky was there, and he kind of hung out to dry. There was a time he was kind of walking around. Nobody would talk to him. I don't know what that means. We called up a bunch of reserves, about 3,000. 3,000, it's not a huge number, but everybody says, oh, means there's going to be World War III this week. And people say that, have been saying that every week now for the last 6 months. Maybe eventually it's true, but it's something you should be concerned about. I mean, it's happening. We're sending munitions over there. Ukraine is bogged down in their counteroffensive because Russia's mined everything. They've dug trenches. It's not good. And then I'll just finish up with this about the Wagner Group. Putin had a meeting with Prigozhin after the supposed coup. He brought Prigozhin and 35 Wagner commanders to the Kremlin to meet with them, and they were allowed to meet and leave. There's a couple high-ranking military guys in Russia that have gone missing. No one knows if they'll ever be seen again. Prigozhin hasn't been seen since the meeting with Putin, so we don't know what's going to happen. Putin says that he told them that they could keep fighting for Russia, but then he came out and he said the Wagner Group doesn't exist anymore. And that's kind of a big deal because they control a lot of Russia's foreign military operations. When you get into Africa, that's where in these regions in Africa, this is where the Wagner Group, there's a lot of conflicts going on there. Central Africa, Mali, Mauritius, there's a lot of conflicts. And so you can see these are areas where the Wagner Group is sort of joined in with the dictators in charge. They then are given interest in oil or mining to fund their operations. But the word that was coming out of Russia this week was Wagner's turned everything back over, at least in the Ukrainian area, they've turned everything back over to Russia. But they have a lot of military equipment, tanks, aircraft, and that type of thing down here in Africa. And so the question is, what's going to happen with that? That's kind of a big deal. Don't really know what's going to happen. Those areas are already destabilized. There's a civil war going on in Sudan. There's also a civil war that's been going on in the Central African Republic. And the Wagner Group has been given control of some gold and diamond mines there in the Central African Republic. And then there's also over towards the Red Sea coast, I think it's coming up here. Oh, in the Chad. I'm sorry, they're in the Chad, which is heavily Islamic. And they're trying to get it tied into the diamond mineral markets in Dubai. And that would give Russia a lot of control over that. So there's a lot of things going on. And a lot of this sort of fits into this whole Ezekiel 38 and 39 thing. And then this is the last thing I'll close with is Erdogan's like, okay, I'll let Sweden into NATO, which happened if you let me into the EU, which is kind of interesting. This is Erdogan. He plays both sides. You know, he's got alliances somewhat with Russia, a little bit with Iran. There's a lot of conflict between them in the area of northern Syria. And then he pretty much came out and said he doesn't want Ukraine coming into NATO. And that's not going to happen for a while. Until NATO's at peace, they're not coming into NATO. And it may never happen. Some people say it might happen by 2030 or 2035 or 2040. So that's a ways off. Crazy world. A lot of things happening. A lot of them relate to Bible prophecy, wars, rumors of wars, artificial intelligence, mark of the beast, Israel, threats to Israel. It's the economy. I think it's going to be a tough fall when we get there. So anyway, let's pray, and we'll resume next week. Lord, thanks for your word. Thank you for giving us information to help guide us through troublesome times. We pray that you'll give us opportunities to share the gospel in these times, which may be appear to be on the verge of starting to wrap up, and we may not have those opportunities much longer. Pray that you'll give us wisdom on how to act in these days. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.